Hello all. As many of you guys have heard the news already, Linux is getting pretty close to 5% desktop market share. According to StatCounter, it's right now at 4.55%. And you know what this means? This means that soon the time is coming. The time is coming, my Linux brothers, where we shall rise and overthrow the shackles of Windows! Cast down Microsoft! Okay, there. Now that I got that out of my system, I want to talk to you about what I think that this is actually going to mean in the long term. So, right now it's at about 4.55%, and this is up from 3%, around 3% in December of 2022, which was up from 2% in January of 2022. So this is actually very, very strong over year growth. It's a year-over-year growth of somewhere between 30 to 50%. This is light years ahead of the roughly 2% desktop market share that Linux kind of hovered around throughout the 2010s. And a really good question that a lot of people have been asking lately is, what's driving this growth? And I think it's actually quite a lot of things. First of all, Linux now is more ready for prime time than it has ever been in the past. Now, yes, we have had relatively user-friendly distros that are easy to navigate and easy to install for quite a long time. Linux Mint has been around since about 2006 and has really been quite there since like 2010 or so. And that's about the same with a lot of distros, minus some hiccups with some desktop environments in the early 2010s. So that's been there for a while. So it's not really that, but it's also sort of that, if that makes any sense. Another big factor is dissatisfaction with both Mac and Microsoft. And I think that if you look at the stats, dissatisfaction with Mac actually seems to be the driver. Windows market share actually seems to be fairly stable. It's not nearly as strong as it used to be, but it's fairly stable between 65 and 70%, where if you look at the StatCan stats, which I'll link below, you'll see where macOS kind of spiked and then dropped. And I think a big part of what's going on is that Mac is getting a lot of bad press lately because of all the shenanigans that they pull with right to repair. And okay, let's be honest, Mac is pretty much just a scam. Okay, they charge you like $2,000 for hardware that probably should cost about $500. And they've been doing this for years. And I wonder if maybe that's kind of starting to catch up with them. Another thing is Windows 11 has been a horrible flop, and it's not catching on in market share at all. And I know that, in fact, this is actually a big thing that kind of got me back into Linux and got me started with this channel, is Windows Snapshot, where it was going to take a screenshot of your desktop every 15 seconds and yeah, no, you're not. You're not doing that to my computer. No, go away. That in my life actually prompted a friend of mine actually asking me a bunch of questions about Linux, and that's actually what got me even started on this channel. So I think that has prompted a lot of renewed interest in Linux. But there's another aspect here too. There's a lot of hurdles that used to exist that aren't really there anymore, or if they're there, they're not as prevalent. Take gaming, for example. Anybody remember what gaming on Linux was like in like 2014? Yeah, not much, unless you really, really liked Quake clones. If you liked Quake clones, then boy, Linux was for you. But if you got tired of playing Quake 3, yeah, there wasn't much. Today, there are way more options than there used to be, largely thanks to Steam. Both with their initial push with SteamOS, that was the original one that was based on Ubuntu, where they convinced a bunch of developers to port games directly to Linux, and now with Proton, which has been just absolutely wonderful. So I would estimate that somewhere between 80 to 70-80% of the games in the Steam library now work pretty well with Linux. The only major hurdle left there is kernel level anti-cheat, which I think is an absolute joke at stopping cheaters, considering any of you ever play Escape from Tarkov? Yeah, that game has kernel level anti-cheat. So that should tell you about how well kernel level anti-cheat actually works at stopping cheaters. It's great for gathering information on people, though, if you wanted to sell that in the future. Just saying. Another thing, too, and this is actually what I think is the biggest block for people starting Linux, at least people that are like actually technologically savvy starting to use Linux. The biggest block, I think, for those people is actually enterprise software. And there's been a pretty big leap in enterprise software for Linux, at least in video editing and in the creative space as a whole. And the reason I say this is because Adobe has been just going down the tubes. Adobe, like, used to be great back in, like, the CS3 days, back when I was studying photography. Yeah, I did that once. Adobe was really, really good. And then they moved to the subscription model that just keeps bilking you money to the point where it's probably more money than most people's internet bills at this point. Yeah, kind of crazy that you're probably paying more for the Adobe Creative Suite than you are for your internet, which is kind of funny because the Adobe Creative Suite needs your internet. And they've been also caught making rather sus changes. Let's say sus. Pretty sus changes to their terms of service. If you guys have if you haven't read into that, I recommend it. It's been a big thing among a lot of YouTubers lately, where they've all been talking about how Adobe's been making these crazy changes to their terms of service and just generally being like really scummy. So because of this has made people leave Adobe for much more Linux-friendly alternatives. Because you see, Adobe has always kind of taken a giant crap on Linux. Let's be real. They've never supported Linux. They might in the future, but honestly, I still kind of doubt it. But with all this crap from Adobe going on, a lot of people have jumped ship for DaVinci Resolve. And DaVinci Resolve has no such problems with supporting Linux because they'll happily take your money because they're not stupid. Like, yeah, you know, why would you cut off 5% of the market share when you can just, well, anyway, that's a whole other thing. Another thing is too, is that the Linux native apps have gotten way better for creative work. Kdenlive is actually pretty good now. And on top of that, for photography, we have stuff like Darktable, which I've been using a bit of lately, and I actually really liked it. So those are some of the major hurdles that have been kind of cleared out of the way that make it much easier for people to switch now than it was in the past. Now, what do I think this means for the future? Like, actually, do I think that this means that we're going into an actual revolution that's going to end Windows? No, but I could see some interesting things happening with that lately, with the way Microsoft has been trending in recent years. Instead, what I think is going to happen is we're not going to see Linux explode into the majority overnight, but, you know, numbers like 10% market share, those are looking a lot more reasonable now than they used to be. And when Linux is suddenly at 10% of the desktop market share, it makes it much, much harder for developers like AutoCAD or Adobe to just keep ignoring Linux. And it just has this general effect of making Linux much more out there in the public consciousness, because then it's something that people actually see day to day. See, I will tell you, the number one reason that I think most people don't use Linux is because most people don't even know what an operating system is. Let's be real. They don't have the faintest clue about how computers work. Okay? That's why I think the reasons for that, like, technical users not using Linux, let's call them technical users, and non-technical users not using Linux, they're different. For technical users, it's like I said before, most of the time for them, it's going to be work software that's going to keep them from switching. Whereas non-technical users, they don't even know what an operating system is, and they're just going to use pretty much whatever comes pre-installed on their computer. But when you're at 10% of the market share or something like that, then, and Linux is much more in the public consciousness, then that'll probably make computers with Linux pre-installed much more likely to be sold from OEMs. I mean, I know you can go and get a System 76 system, or you can even order systems from Dell or HP with Linux pre-installed. But when you go to Best Buy, which is where most people go to buy a computer, or Walmart or whatever, and you look at the PCs that they have in front of you, you got two choices. You got Mac, sorry, and then you've got a Windows. So with a Linux that's at a much stronger market share, it's a lot more likely that you'll begin to see a third option in those places. Because even though I know there's a bunch of like really shady supply chain deals and stuff like that going on, if that kind of leverage isn't as strong anymore, then it doesn't really hurt a company like Best Buy or something like, or Walmart, to stock a third option, especially if it's in just a couple of PCs. Another thing that I want to cover, that I want to talk about for a quick minute too, is potential fears that I have of Linux getting more popular, because there could be some drawbacks too. Now, I will say I'm not quite like Luke Smith here. I don't think we're going to see an well, okay, let me rephrase that. We will see an enshittified Linux, but Linux is so fragmented that it would be possible to enshittify Linux as a whole. But don't be surprised to see, as Linux gets more popular, to see more and more distros like Ubuntu. Or, even worse, Ubuntu, but an immutable distro. So like, imagine if you had all the crap that comes with Canonical, mixed with all the crap that comes with Windows, and then mix that into an immutable distro where the user can't really change and customize anything. That could be a real problem for the future. And I'm not completely against immutable distros. They do have their place, but I really don't think that place is the general desktop. I think they would be absolutely fantastic in enterprise environments where you don't want a Cheryl from HR infecting your entire computer network because she opened the wrong email link. They would be great for that kind of thing. Or, you know, when you hire Steve and Steve thinks he knows all about computers and then he doesn't, and then he finds a way to break things. Yeah, Steve can't break the immutable distros. So it would be great for that kind of use case. But not that that's really much of a problem these days. But I don't think it would be very good for general desktop use. But I could see, with a stronger Linux market share, a company coming in and trying to push these immutable distros onto desktop users. And frankly, the worst part is that I could actually see it being commercially successful because it would allow you to do something very similar to what Apple does, where they couple the hardware very, very tightly with the OS. And thus they could actually make a system that is very lean and actually runs very, very well on the hardware it's on. But then it's also like you can't actually do anything to it. So at that point, is it even really your property? Seriously, is it? I kind of don't think so when it's the developer making the decisions on what to do with it, not you. So anyway, that is just my thoughts on the future of Linux as we hit and some potential hurdles as we hit 5% desktop market share. Don't forget to like and subscribe and pray every day.